Hello everyone, welcome again. Today is my second video. Today is the 24th of November, and yesterday was the day when the United States celebrates Thanksgiving. And I wanted to do this yesterday, but somehow something told me that it wasn't prudent to do it yesterday. And so I decided to leave it until today, when I was hoping that my thoughts would be a little bit, I don't know whether better explained, but certainly I would have time to think about it a little bit, on what to say and how to say it. And sure enough, some of the things I was going to show you and share with you, some videos and stuff, I decided against it and concentrate on something similar to what I was going to say, but a different topic altogether. And that is that perhaps on Thanksgiving Day, it occurred to me that perhaps while Americans are gathered together at the dinner table, that just as the Jewish do in one of their feast days, that they might start with the youngest person round the table asking, "What are we celebrating?" And then for the elders, for the eldest one, to talk about America, the United States, and the history of the country, and perhaps where America is going, perhaps with a hope for the future, and that would perhaps start a meaningful conversation around the dinner table about their country, just instead of talking about, other things. It seems that what I'm trying to say is that Thanksgiving to be used as a time of reflection rather than just celebration. Reflection that may lead to hope and celebration. The two things are not exclusive. But not to exclude reflection about the things they're doing well and the things that they're doing not so well and the things that they're doing badly. And I did find in, let me see here, the famous speech. Let me see if I can see it. The famous speech by President Kennedy in 1963 at the American University, the graduation ceremony, when he talked about peace in the world. It seems, I suggest that if you haven't read it, or better still listen to it, it's on YouTube, that you do listen. It's not very long, but it's very telling about what his hope for the future of America would be. I find in this speech that it's not as if he wasn't aware of the things that America had not done so well vis-a-vis other countries. Of course he was aware. What things? Well, for example, before I go to his speech, the United States had already, in international relations, geopolitics, he was, of course, America had already the Monroe Doctrine, yes, where they pledged that no foreign power would be allowed to enter into the Western Hemisphere, into the American continent, North, Central, and South. It was the Monroe Doctrine did not say we will not allow other foreign powers to be here at our border. It was clearly stated that the whole of the American hemisphere, the American continent. That led, I suppose, to the what Americans regard Central and South America as their backyard. And Central and South America in the whole of the 20th century has not been allowed to breathe, as it were, politically. Just to give you an example, in 1898, President McKinley orders U.S. troops to invade Cuba. In 1905, President Theodore Roosevelt orders the invasion of Honduras. In 1912, President Taft orders the invasion of Nicaragua. In 1914-18, First World War, President Wilson invades Haiti, Cuba, and Panama. 1924-26, President Coolidge invades Nicaragua and Honduras. 1954, President Eisenhower approved the overthrow of the government of Guatemala. In 1961, Kennedy himself approves the CIA invasion of Cuba. In 1965, President Johnson invades the Dominican Republic. In 1973, President Nixon approves the overthrow of the elected government of Chile. In 1981, President Reagan approves the CIA's secret war against Nicaragua. 1983, President Reagan orders the invasion of Grenada. Well, we are here from 1898 to 1983. Now, of course, President Kennedy, I will deal with what comes after that in a second, namely 251 overt operations in different countries in the world. But at that time, in 1963, President Kennedy obviously knew, perhaps better than anyone, what his country was doing, had done. But it seems to me, as you read the speech, and I watched him too, that he was talking about the future of what he hoped America could be, America could become. He talks about those who want to impose a Pax Americana. Remember the Roman Empire, talk about the empire is Pax Romana. Yeah, the Pax Americana would eventually, from 1991, would become the empire, or give it the name you want. But he starts by saying, there are few earthly things more beautiful than a university, wrote John Masefield in his tribute to English universities. And his words are equally true today. He did not refer to spires and towers, to campus greens and ivied walls. He admired the splendid beauty of the university, he said, because it was a place where those who hate ignorance may strive to know, where those who perceive truth may strive to make others see. I have, he continues, therefore chosen this time and this place to discuss a topic on which ignorance too often abounds, and the truth is too rarely perceived, yet it is the most important topic on earth: world peace. He knew where his country was, he knew where his country had been. He's exposing a hope for the future. He continues, what kind of peace do I mean? What kind of peace do we seek? Not a Pax Americana enforced on the world by American weapons of war. Not the peace of the grave or the security of the slave. I'm talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living, the kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and to build a better life for their children. Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women, not merely peace in our time, but peace for all time. A time, perhaps I add, where we may start laughing and smiling again. He continues, I speak of peace because of the new phase of war. Total war makes no sense in an age when great powers can maintain large and relatively invulnerable nuclear forces and refuse to surrender without resort to those forces. It makes no sense in an age when a single nuclear weapon contains almost 10 times the explosive force delivered by all the Allied air forces in the Second World War. It makes no sense in an age when the deadly poisons produced by a nuclear exchange would be carried by wind and water and soil and seed to the far corners of the globe and to generations yet unborn. Today, the expenditure of billions of dollars every year on weapons acquired for the purpose of making sure we never need to use them is essential to keeping the peace, but surely the acquisition of such idle stockpiles, which can only destroy and never create, is not the only, much less the most efficient, means of assuring peace. I speak of peace, therefore, as the necessary rational end of rational men. I realize that the pursuit of peace is not as dramatic as the pursuit of war, and frequently the words of the pursuer fall on deaf ears, but we have no more urgent task. Some say that it is useless to speak of world peace or world law or world disarmament, and that it will be useless until the leaders of the Soviet Union adopt a more enlightened attitude. I hope they do. I believe we can help them do it. But I also believe that we must re-examine our own attitude as individuals and as a nation, for our attitude is as essential as theirs. And every graduate of this school, every thoughtful citizen who despairs of war and wishes to bring peace, should begin by looking inward, by examining his own attitude towards the possibilities of peace, towards the Soviet Union, toward the course of the Cold War, and toward freedom and peace here at home. First, let us examine our attitude towards peace itself. Too many of us think it is impossible. Too many think it unreal. But that is a dangerous, defeatist belief. It leads to the conclusion that war is inevitable, that mankind is doomed, that we are gripped by forces we cannot control. We need not accept that view. Our problems are man-made, therefore they can be solved by man, and man can be as big as he wants. No problem of human destiny is beyond human beings. Man's reason and spirit have often solved the seemingly unsolvable, and we believe they can do it again. I am not referring to the absolute infinite concept of peace and goodwill of which some fantasies and fanatics dream. I do not deny the value of hopes and dreams, but we merely invite discouragement and incredulity by making that our only and immediate goal. Let us focus instead on a more practical, more attainable peace, based not on a sudden revolution in human nature, but on a gradual evolution in human institutions, on a series of concrete actions and effective agreements which are in the interest of all concerned. There is no single simple key to this peace, no grand or magic formula to be adopted by one or two powers. Genuine peace must be the product of many nations, the sum of many acts. It must be dynamic, not static, changing to meet the challenge of each new generation. For peace is a process, a way of solving problems. With such a peace, there will still be quarrels and conflicting interests, as there are within families and nations. World peace, like community peace, does not require that each man loves his neighbor. It requires only that they live together in mutual tolerance, submitting their disputes to a just and peaceful settlement. And history teaches us that enmities between nations, as between individuals, do not last forever. However fixed our likes and dislikes may seem, the tide of time and events will often bring surprising changes in the relations between nations and neighbors. So let us persevere. Peace need not be impractical, and war need not be inevitable. By defining our goal more clearly, by making it seem more manageable and less remote, we can help all peoples to see it, to draw hope from it, and to move irresistibly toward it. Second, let us re-examine our attitude towards the Soviet Union. It is discouraging to think that their leaders may actually believe what their propagandists write. It is discouraging to read a recent authoritative Soviet text on military strategy and find on page after page wholly baseless and incredible claims, such as the allegation that American imperialist circles are preparing to unleash different types of wars, that there is a very real threat of a preventive war being unleashed by American imperialists against the Soviet Union, and that the political aims of the American imperialists are to enslave economically and politically the European and other capitalist countries, and to achieve world domination by means of aggressive wars. He was making a point here. Indeed, that text might have been found in Soviet Union propaganda, but he was telling something to the upcoming industrial military complex, I think, and the CIA. Truly, as it was written long ago, the wicked flee when no man pursueth. Yet it is sad to read these Soviet statements, to realize the extent of the gulf between us. But it is also a warning to the American people not to fall into the same trap as the Soviets. Here we are. Not to see only a distorted and desperate view of the other side, not to see conflict as inevitable, accommodation as impossible, and communication as nothing more than an exchange of threats. No government or social system is so evil that its people must be considered as lacking in virtue. As Americans, we find communism profoundly repugnant as a negation of personal freedom and dignity, but we can still hail the Russian people for their many achievements in science and space, in economic and industrial growth, in culture, and in acts of courage. Among the many traits the peoples of our two countries have in common, none is stronger than our mutual abhorrence of war. Almost unique among the major world powers, we have never been at war with each other, and no nation in the history of battle ever suffered more than the Soviet Union suffered in the course of the Second World War. At least 20 million lost their lives. Countless millions of homes and farms were burned or sacked. A third of the nation's territory, including nearly 2/3 of its industrial base, was turned into a wasteland, a loss equivalent to the devastation of this country east of Chicago. Today, should total war ever break out again, no matter how, our two countries would become the primary targets. It is an ironic but accurate fact that the two strongest powers are the two in the most danger of devastation. All we have built, all we have worked for, would be destroyed in the first 24 hours. And even in the Cold War, which brings burdens and dangers to so many nations, including these nations' closest allies, our two countries bear the heaviest burdens. For we are both devoting massive sums of money to weapons that could be better devoted to combating ignorance, poverty, and disease. We are both caught up in a vicious and dangerous cycle in which suspicion on one side breeds suspicion on the other, and new weapons beget counter-weapons. In short, both the United States and its allies, and the Soviet Union and its allies, have a mutually deep interest in a just and genuine peace and in halting the arms race. Agreements to this end are in the interests of the Soviet Union as well as ours, and even the most hostile nations can be relied upon to accept and keep those treaty obligations, and only those treaty obligations which are in their own interest. Goes on for a while. I urge you to read it. But he ends with, saying this. This is the last paragraph. The United States, as the world knows, will never start a war. We do not want a war. We do not expect a war. This generation of Americans has already had enough, more than enough, of war and hate and oppression. We shall be prepared if others wish it. We shall be alert to try to stop it, but we shall also do our part to build a world of peace where the weak are safe and the strong are just. We are not helpless before that task or hopeless of its successes. Confident and unafraid, we labor on, not toward a strategy of annihilation, but toward a strategy of peace. So, this is how it ends, and this is where we are today. Well, the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, and so there were no two hegemons, two dominant powers in the world, but only one. And what changed was that the one remaining, the United States, it would seem to me, started applying that Monroe Doctrine that had been reserved for the American continent to the rest of the world. There have been, since 1991, 251 interventions in the rest of the world. Now, let me tell you carefully. From 1798, overt operations 469, 251 since 1991. And these are figures given by the United States government. These are from the Congressional Research Office that answers to the Government Research Office. Every year they update these numbers. Is a list which is called the Instances of Use of the U.S. Armed Forces Abroad. So, since the end of the Cold War, 251 listings, but these are the listings of officially acknowledged interventions, where the armed forces themselves intervene. They do not include covert operations by military services and intelligence services that are not publicly disclosed, does not include, for example, regime change operations, does not include coups, only publicly acknowledge military deployment of U.S. forces abroad. So we can assume that that list of 251 will be much greater than that. Now, what happened to that hope and that vision for the future? They blew his brains off. So he was killed, and then his brother was killed 5 years later, lest he dared continue with the same hope. And America was changed. So I don't know whether there was. I think most Americans accept that that was a sort of a coup. I don't know whether it was the first. I don't know whether it was even the last. There have been suggestions of, let's say, conspiracy theorists. I don't like the word conspiracy. I think it's duplicity more than anything else. Duplicity rather than conspiracy. But some have suggested that in some writings that perhaps Nixon's resignation was also a coup, an indirect coup, but a coup nevertheless. Apparently, I have no direct knowledge, of course, but apparently the journalist Bernstein, working for the Washington Post with the Watergate story and so on. You know, we remember the movie, All the President's Men and so on. Apparently it is said now that he was a CIA agent from the very beginning there. which would change everything, really, if that is true. I don't know. But in any case, what happened was that was perhaps in 1963, the time when a president could still envisage a future which was going to be different from America as an empire in the rest of the world, imposing its will through sanctions or regime change or do as we tell you or else. And that was perhaps the last president who could hope for a future like that. I was going to mention, I'll leave that for some other time. So I'll finish with this, that on Thanksgiving, American citizens reflect, and that the youngest asks at the dinner table, what are we celebrating? And that the eldest might explain the history of the country, the good, the bad, the indifferent, like all other countries, but being the most powerful country in the world, it's going to have more repercussions on what it does. And that the eldest may come back to that moment in 1963 and may inspire the young generation with a few words of hope, if we can manage to turn the Titanic in a different direction. Happy Thanksgiving. Goodbye.